Hey, it's Jordan. I'm here with Beth Marcassino, and you are a resident in North Carolina in the Wilmington area. You are, just by watching the mega Facebook page, you're one of the leaders of. You are one of the leading activists, it seems, against what's really just astronomical contamination levels at the hands of DuPont and its spin-off company, Chemours. I was down on the ground there 2 years ago, so I just want to explain, if the audience doesn't know, in a nutshell, DuPont, which then became Chemours, has been dumping cancer-causing, among other autoimmune issues, reproductive issues, chemicals into the Cape Fear River, which is goes from Fayetteville all the way down to Wilmington. And essentially, you all were in the dark for decades about this until last year.
39 years now.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, obviously last year this became news and you guys found out. And now there is, it seems it was just put in the middle of the night, a proposed consent order between the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality and the chemical company, Chemours, and an environmental group there, the Cape Fear River Watch. Essentially, cliff notes, and tell me if I'm missing anything. Chemours is going to get off with a $12 million fine. They only have to, pay for water, for contaminated wells, and a couple other miscellaneous things. It seems to me, that's essentially for a company like DuPont and, Chemours, which is essentially the same thing, a slap on the pinky finger.
No, for sure it is. The big thing is that Chemours was designed as a fall-off company for DuPont. And in the consent order, it only addresses Chemours. It doesn't address DuPont. And also in the consent order, it basically absolves them from all of their previous crimes, I guess you would say. So one of our big problems is that since it absolves them from all of their previous pollutants, does this also then absolve DuPont from that as well? And we have a problem with that, as many as other things within the consent order, because, as you know, DuPont has polluted our river for 39 years unbeknownst to us. DuPont should also be listed within that, as well as Chemours, because it's been, a long time of them polluting our river. We have over 47 known chemicals within our river. We know right now that there are sealed documents of chemicals, and we are trying to get those released. And a big thing is that Chemours is rushing for this consent order to go through. And the big reason is why. And what is inside this consent order are things that our state could already enforce under the Clean Water Act. And they should already be enforcing, and they should already be penalizing Chemours and DuPont for those actions,
And what's amazing to me, so just to make sure the audience understands, essentially these chemicals that have been dumped were the waste byproducts during the manufacturing of Teflon, products like Teflon, which is non-stick cookware. So they've been dumping for years, and as in all cases, the company knew they were doing this. It's not like, they just realized they were accidentally dumping. It's not just going into the water, it's going into the air, it's going into the ground soil, wildlife obviously being threatened. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the chemical company, like the fossil fuel companies, the government basically emboldens them to do the testing. And shocker, when they do the testing to see contamination levels, they find fairly low levels. But the judge with this allowed the plaintiffs, because there was a lot of class action lawsuits that were pulled into one, to do their own testing, but the test results had to be sealed. That sounds preposterous to me. What's the point of doing testing if the public and the people like you who you
Yeah.
might be getting sick, can't know what's in your water.
Well, I'm glad you actually brought that up because we have had one Gen X study, and this is the only Gen X study that has ever been done with humans that we know of. And I took part of that 400-person study that we just recently had done. We had our blood, urine, and our water at our homes tested. And within that, we found 4 new chemicals that Chemours is dumping within our waters. And I have high levels of PFOA, PFAS, Naphthalene byproduct 2, all within my blood. And residents within our area, that took part in the study too. We all have those levels.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want I want the audience to understand. So PFOA, PFOA, PFOAS, this is being found throughout the country, and it's now being found in Michigan, which already has the Flint problem, and they are cancer-causing chemicals. They can cause cancer, they could cause reproductive issues for women, they could cause autoimmune issues, kidney problems, thyroid problems. I mean, the list goes on.
High cholesterol.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure they knew what that meant. Go on.
Yeah, so one of the things is that, so we got the results of the study knowing that all of these chemicals are in our blood and our water. We're waiting for the urine to come back, and yet within this consent order, they didn't consider any of those results already that we know is in our body. And in the consent order, they're only addressing a small amount of chemicals within the PFAS family, Gen X being one of them, when we have this large amount of chemicals within the Cape Fear River. We know that within the PFAS family, there's over 4,000 different types of PFAS chemicals. And chemicals like C8 or Gen X, they can break down into other types of chemicals as well, like byproducts. And those are just as harmful. One thing that we're very worried about is what the combined effects are. And in the consent order, it's not addressing the combined effects of these chemicals. And we have no idea what they are, or even another thing is that there's no limits of what these combined chemicals are. So we know that Gen X is at 140 parts per trillion, and we know that, PFASs are at like 70 parts per trillion. But what are these combined numbers together? We have no limitations for those. And we should having in discharges in our bodies and all of that. What's happening right now in North Carolina, having this large amount of chemicals within our water and in our bodies by this billion-dollar corporation is very groundbreaking. So why is this rush to push forward a consent order when we need to do more research, more studies? These are all things that our government can be funding in the meantime. And again, we should be pushing DuPont and Chemours to also be paying for things within the Clean Water Act for putting filters on their own equipment already. They already should be having all of that, and none of this should have, even happened. So.
And I want to ask you, because obviously it's important to look forward to how to stop it, but I also think it's instructive to look backwards, because it's not like the people watching that aren't in North Carolina don't have big corporate polluters with factories near them. And my understanding, Gen X and these kind of chemicals are not federally regulated by the EPA. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, so some are federally regulated and some of them aren't. Gen X was too new to be federally regulated. And so that's where we're at now, getting it to become federally regulated.
Because what I'm getting at is, it was DuPont. They could switch into a smaller company. But how does DuPont dump these chemicals since 1980, I think it was, without regulators, without any oversight of the company. And they definitely knew about the high levels before it came out in 2017. Yeah. But like we saw in Flint, like we've seen everywhere else, it's not like they willingly go public, oh, we have these high levels. It's usually whistleblowers or something like that that raise the alarm. So how does this happen where this was going on for decades without any regulators, without any politicians, without anyone sounding the alarm?
That's a good question. Because they don't make them do any testing on newer found chemicals, because it takes years and years and years to have rat testing done and all of that. What happened with Gen X is the predecessor of Gen X was C8. DuPont added an extra oxygen molecule and created Gen X. And Gen X runs quicker through the body is what we believe it does. And just by adding that extra oxygen molecule, they were able to create a new chemical, which meant they were able to label it different, release it different, and not have the restrictions that C8 did. So then they were able to get permits for it, and so on down the road. In West Virginia, there was that $1 million, lawsuit that was happening from the C8 working group. And they did all the studies knowing that it did cause reproduction problems, kidney problems, and everything like that. Then the federal government said, you no longer need to be using C8. And they told 3M and everybody that, we're going to stop using C8, period. And then that's when they use, again, the extra oxygen molecule and created Gen X. They replaced C8 with Gen X, not only in North Carolina, but in Ohio and in West Virginia. They did it also in Italy, Japan, Australia, like all over the world. So we all have Gen X. Nobody told us, and essentially how they just put, the extra molecule in there. So, and just until now, we're finding out how harmful it really is.
And just so the audience knows, the extra, you said it was a spin-off of C8. Well, when it was C8, which is basically the same thing with an extra molecule, the Ohio River Valley lawsuit you're talking about, DuPont had to settle for $670 million last year. You're talking people died. You're talking a lot of illness, widespread illness. And that's a region that's already contaminated with coal and things like that. And again, you might think, oh, $670 million, that's a lot. And maybe that will deter them from doing anything. But companies like DuPont, I'd love to know what you think, this is basically like an expense that they factor in on their balance sheet. Because at the moment, it's very rare, there's no criminal penalty. No executives have gone to jail that I know of. And they basically look at it, well, this is the price of doing business. Sometimes we'll get slapped maybe in the head as opposed to the wrist. But, it's very, very dangerous when there's corporations and chemical companies like this can do this. And basically it's folded into their budget. That, okay, well, overall, we're making billions, so if we have to pay a couple $100 million, so be it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they created Chemours as a fall-off company so that when lawsuits started coming in, they would essentially sue Chemours for Gen X, and it would fold down. They never thought that Chemours would actually start making money from these products. And a lot of people, we're starting to know that these chemicals are in Teflon and in the pans and this and that, but they're in surgical equipment, they're in Scotchgard. These products from DuPont are in everyday things that we use, and it's very hard to get rid of it. And DuPont and Chemours, they know what what an asset they are to everybody within the market, but we really need to think of smarter chemistry that doesn't cause harm to both our environment and to human well-being.
And that's a good segue, because you said within the market. I spoke with another activist, Beth, and I spoke with another activist, Samantha, and it seems that North Carolina really likes this image that we are like #1 for business, and now I think they're lowering the corporate tax rate down to 2.5%, and I was only there once to cover this, but the impression I got is these officials, local level and state, like in a lot of other states, kind of look the other way because they're, quote, business friendly. What has been the response? Because originally when I was there last year, the response was very delayed from local and state officials. I am assuming you're still kind of fighting the fight with these officials who, by the way, many of them take money from the company.
Yeah. So our group was established. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our group was established the day that the article from Dr. Kanapi came out about Gen X. And right away we went out through the gates saying, this has happened in West Virginia, this has happened here and there, this is something big. And people just wanted to hush us down, and so right away we were just wondering, this is big. Why we have chemicals in our water? The Cape Fear River is one of the largest rivers, in our nation. So why are they trying to brush this off? Even our meeting with Chemours, it was all behind the scenes. Everything, like you said, everything was really a slow roll. Even today, our governor hasn't been as proactive as other governors in other states we have seen, and that's a bit disappointing, because we have seen other governors go for federal assistance, whereas we have not seen any of that from our governor. And we know we have over 400,000 people right now that are affected from these chemicals. We don't have a circle of contamination right now. And that's really striking that, they want to put this consent order in when we don't even know where the contamination stops. So they're just really wanting to sweep things under the rug, and without knowing harm or the end of contamination. It's been a really huge uphill climb to educate people. We have some leaders that, my family came from farming industry themselves, but we have some leaders that is also their living too. So we wonder if they are siding on the side of industry, thinking that we are taking an attack on the industry. We're not taking an attack on the industry per se. We have regulations in place for a reason, to protect the people and to protect our natural resources. And if you are abiding by those, then we don't have a problem. But it's when you don't stick to regulations, when you're causing harm to the environment and people, that's when we are finding, problems with that. And we expect our legislation and our governor to then, and DEQ, to come in and enforce those laws that are created.
And it's a different situation, because, for example, when you have a situation like Flint, right? That was an immediate cause and effect. They switched the water on a specific day, and very quickly after, you start seeing people with rashes, you start seeing people with hair loss, nosebleeds, a lot, physical things that you could see within one city. Whereas this is across many, many counties. This is starting in Fayetteville, I believe, is the Cape Fear River, all the way down to Wilmington. And this is not just like, not 2014, but you're talking 1980. So it's kind of hard because it's not like lead going in the pipes, which will cause an immediate reaction if lead gets in the water. This, it's not like going out. It's easy to visibly see who's sick, who's not. So how has that been for you guys to figure out what is the true health consequences? Because the research I've done, it does seem like, you know, I looked at a map. It does seem like there's increased thyroid issues in that in that region in the 2010s, this decade. And just talking to people anecdotally, everyone's been saying to me, yeah, all of a sudden people are starting to talk, and yeah, my kid has high cholesterol. And can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so we have a unidentified childhood cancer cluster here in Wilmington. Many of those women whose children have cancer are personal friends of mine that I've met through my fight, you know, for clean water. And also in Fayetteville, large cancer cluster there. But you have to meet certain criteria to become an identified, you know, cancer cluster. One mom in Fayetteville, 2 of her children have one of the rarest forms of cancer. And she's right by Chemours. I mean, you know, we have lots of people with thyroid problems, lots of women that have had pregnancy loss, and myself. In 2016, I was pregnant with my son Samuel, and at 24 weeks, I felt a sharp pain in my stomach and went to the doctors and found out that my son didn't develop kidney, bladder, or bowel. And I'm a marathon runner. You can actually see all my medals behind us. And I drink tons and tons of water as I run. And even in the hospital, they kept pumping me with more water to drink. And me and my husband, we ended up losing my son, Samuel. And I never thought anything of it until that day we found out about the contamination. And myself and others, we all wonder, is what's going on due to what's in our water? Because like I said, I've been very healthy other than drinking tons and tons and tons of water. And we know what's in our water, and we know that it causes cancer and thyroid problems and kidney problems. And to sit at a meeting and hear Chemours blatantly lie to your face when you're holding your friend's hand that just got done with chemo treatment that morning, and his skin is like melting, that's hard, you know. Sorry. These companies, they just move on from town to town to town doing this, and they lie to us. They pick areas of pollution or to pollute on purpose. They set them up along rivers. If you look on a map of where DuPont and Chemours are, you'll see they're along all bodies of water, so they can dump their wastewater there. You'll see there's other towns called Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where people have large amounts within a couple miles of cancer. And it's a large African-American community, and nobody is talking about them. Nobody is helping them. And, you know, and also, you know, you have your Flint, your Flint, Michigan. What's going on with North Carolina and Louisiana and Flint with our water crisis? This is an epidemic that is happening. We need more restrictions on chemicals that are being allowed to be used. We know that chemicals do have health effects because they do testing, and the EPA does have these results of the animal testing. And so why would the EPA let a company that their results say it causes cancer in rats or, kidney problems and stuff, why would they let this chemical go into, a waterway? And that's a problem that we've seen over and over again in our investigations with DuPont and Chemours, that both DEQ and the EPA knew what chemicals that were being dumped into our water and let it happen for 39 years. We knew back in where we found out back in 2002 that DEQ knew that DuPont was dumping C8 in our river and nothing was done. And that was 13 years ago. So from 2002 into now, nobody was watching our river to see what else could have been done. And so from one chemical, from C8 to now, we have this long list of chemicals in our river, when if they would have stopped them back in, 2002 with C8, we might not have had what we have today. And so we cannot have this consent order go through because we're so much wiser now. We have some of the leading scientists in our area that have been working on these chemicals and writing papers and doing research and development. And we know that we are not only helping our area, but other areas around the world that we are researching with Italy and Australia and things like that. So we want to make a breakthrough for our environment and for our water and for the health of everybody, because we have to stop this,
And
just because.
And by the way, I'm sorry for your loss.
Yes. Sorry.
What I think is super important about what you're saying is I think a lot of people that are not informed on these issues, and most people aren't.
No, yeah.
They look at the headlines and they think, oh, the EPA and all this was fine before President Trump. And don't get me wrong, I mean, he's made it a lot worse. But they kind of think that, like, oh, the EPA is a really fierce regulator and protecting the environment, and Obama did so much for the environment and climate change and yada yada yada, and around the edges maybe he did, but at the end of the day, it's kind of the corporations, essentially, the reason the EPA lets them do whatever they want is because the corporations have bought off our federal government and our state government. I mean, all you got to do is follow the money. So I think it's important that people realize, like, yes, it's important to pay attention to what the Trump administration is doing, but this kind of contamination is not unique to North Carolina, and it's not just happening since 2017. It's happening since probably the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, because in the industrial buildup, there was not an EPA back then, and really nobody was thinking about 50 years from now. They were thinking about 6 months from now, a year from now. So
DuPont started with firearms and fire powder and things like that. That's how they got their buildup, and we have pictures of them with presidents, like you said, back in the 1900s, the beginning, with presidents shaking hands, and they were on the boards of different committees at the White House, and that has gone on after generation and generation and generation. And so, it's money and power and greed, but it's not, it's profit over people. And a lot of people have fell asleep at the wheel and have not paid attention. And it's also, I hate to say, but us as a community have forgotten our voice and holding people, our legislation responsible for that, and just thinking automatically that they should be doing this for us.
Right.
You
And
know,
I want to ask you also because, you know, I think the country is so polarized and divided, but I always tell my audience, like, you know, conservative people care if their water is being contaminated too.
everybody does. I mean, we're a purple group. We're
Yeah.
not like one way or another. We're completely purple. Everybody cares if you're drinking poisonous water, you know,
Right.
no matter who you are. Yeah.
Right. So I was bringing that up because, you know, everybody asks, like, what are some things that everybody could come together? And I've seen it covering the pipelines, you know, conservative ranch owners, you know, who like Dick Cheney, they're not happy when their land gets seized by eminent domain to put a pipeline in their backyard. I've met them and I've interviewed them. And just like that, I have met people that are more conservative in Michigan and Indiana and probably North Carolina that are, maybe they like Trump, maybe they hated Obama, maybe they watch Fox News, but this is very alarming. So I think, I'd love to know what you think as far as like a movement, because I think the water crisis, honestly, is the most underreported and not reported at all story in the country. I don't get me wrong, you know, you want to have an investigation about Russia, great, but Russia is not going to poison your kids' water, as far as I know. Maybe Rachel Maddow thinks so, but that's not reality. So what I'm getting at is, how do people watching who might have water problems in their country bring people together? Because as you're seeing with the, you know, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of the world and the climate change movement for a Green New Deal, it's starting to apply pressure on politicians, but you don't see that yet nationally for the water crisis.
It really is a everybody at every level issue. It's something, like you said, we can all relate to. We all need water to survive. When they say Miniwoko, water is life, it truly is. You need water to sustain your life. And I know when you look at water, it looks clear, but once you put it under a microscope, then you really see what's behind water. And we have to hold these corporations accountable for what's being done. And the biggest thing is, and I have seen this since our water contamination, and I have actually seen this firsthand in Flint, because I've gone to Flint many times with their water crisis. When a community comes together in times of trials, our voices are so much louder to get a problem heard and solved than any other person. And we can accomplish so much. I mean, in the beginning of this, I was just a mom that was just wanted to help. And now I am speaking for a very large community that has been poisoned for 39 years by a billion-dollar corporation. And I won't stop until they're stopped. And because I know the faces of the people in my community that are depending on me to not let up on this. And that's what we need everybody from around the world to know, that it's not just Flint, it's not just North Carolina, it's not just West Virginia or Ohio. If you look outside your window and investigate, you'll see that what's happening in our communities is also happening in your community. And if you join together with us in this fight, we can stop these polluters from happening.
And my last question, so we know that you don't want the current consent order and what is in it. What is, I mean, obviously you can't speak for all of North Carolina, but
Yes.
what would your group, you have a Facebook group that has 11,000 members. We'll put the link under this video. What do you want to see in a consent order or an agreement? Or has that not been fully decided?
No, there's not really something that we've fully discussed at this moment. I think it's kind of like talking about a marathon. We're in mile 1 right now. We got a long ways to go. We have a lot to learn about within all of these chemicals. And like I said, the combined chemical reaction, health studies, and we can't sign it. We can't sign a consent yet. What's the rush? You know, this would benefit Chemours more than it would benefit our people. I mean, they want to put GAC filtrations on wells when we know that there's still breakthroughs on GAC filtration systems. They want to do things within this consent order that it should already be addressed under the Clean Water Act. I mean, there's no need to rush a consent order like this when there's laws in place to already do these types of things. So it really is just asking for funding from our, state level and government level to do more testing, find out how many more people are contaminated, finding out what these chemicals can do, getting the documents that are sealed from Chemours unsealed to find out what are they hiding. And these are all things that we need our local and federal government to come in and help the people.
I lied. One last question. So I think because, listen, we're independent media, we're growing and trying to get funding, but I got to tell you, I think a real big piece of this is you don't really have a national media in this country. I mean, you have national media that's really theater. I mean, it's like as Trump tweets and hysteria, and that's all they cover. Meanwhile, you have this kind of stuff going on, and CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they got all the resources in the world to have people on the ground there, to do investigations, to hold politicians accountable. In my experience, most of these places, the local media, there's exceptions, but by and large, they just repeat what the state and the corporations tell them. So what needs to happen as far as not just governmental demands, but demands for the media to treat this as the crisis that it is?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. We need more people to tell our story. I have heard from some media outlets that, we've already done the water crisis thing. And it's like, well, if you were drinking what I was drinking, would you want your story told and told and told and told? You would. And that's what's happening everywhere. We hear stories of other things all the time. And it's sad, but it's the truth. And what's going on in my home and in other homes about water contamination, this is poisoning. These are chemicals that are poisoning us and causing people to die and get sick. This is the truth. And yes, it's sad, and people don't want to hear about it because it's their water that they drink. But you need to report it, and it's the right thing to do, Right.
How could people find out more about your group if people want to get involved who are watching in North Carolina or wherever they're watching? How could people find out?
They can go to our Facebook pages where they can get the most information and join us in our fight.
What's it called?
It's a long name. North Carolina Stop Gen X in Our Water. And Gen X is GENX.
Right. In
our water.
And I think it's important. A lot of people, when they watch segments on other places, don't realize 9 out of 10 times there's something going on that you don't even know yet in your area. How can people, you're not an expert on it, but maybe you have some recommendations. How do people investigate, what's going on in their neck of the woods?
They can go to their local utility company online and look up a water report. They have to list certain chemicals within their water report. Sometimes it might not have an in-depth water report, but then you can also call up your utility and say, well, North Carolina and all of these other all these other states are testing for PFASs. Why aren't you testing for the PFAS content, or PFAS chemical? Because this is something that most municipalities should also be testing for. I know that some small new municipalities aren't testing for it, but most are. So you can really go online, look up your water company, and look up the water report, and see what levels it's at. Also come to our page and just say, I live here. And usually there's somebody in our group that lives somewhere around you and can direct you to some information. A big source of information is just search the internet. Go to Google, type in, your city and type in water contamination, all of those things. You would really be surprised what pops up. And once you open Pandora's box, you can't close it. And then you just end up like me and you're on this crusade to shut down a corporation that has been hurting people for a really long time.
I really appreciate you taking this much time with me, and please keep in touch with me. You have my number. What's going on there? As soon as we get the funding, we'll be back down.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And thank you for all your time and letting people know about what's happening, not just here, but all over the world. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.